our main speaker, our key speaker for tonight. Now, Adrian Cheok is Adrian David Cheok. Professor Dr. Adrian David Cheok is of Greek and Malaysian heritage. He was born and raised in Adelaide, South Australia, graduated from the University of Adelaide with a Bachelor of Engineering in 1992 and an Engineering PhD in 1998. Among Adrian's many awards are his Hitachi Fellowship, the Agency for Science, Technology and Research Young Scientist of the Year Award, the Singaporean Computer Society Young Professional of the Year Award, an Associate of the Arts Award by the Minister for Information, Communications and the Arts, Singapore, a Microsoft Research Award for Gaming and Graphics, the Integrated Art Competition Prize by the Singapore Land Transport Authority, Creativity in Action Award, and the Nokia Mind Trek Award. He was invited to be the Singapore representative of the United Nations Body of Entertainment Computing and was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of the Encouragement of Arts, Manufacturers and Commerce. He was also awarded the Distinguished Alumni Award by the University of Adelaide in 2016. And there are others, I might add. Adrian Cheok's academic works include, but are not limited to, sitting on the editorial board of International Journal of Arts and Technology and the Journal of Virtual Reality and Broadcasting. Professor Dr. Cheok is among the top 0.06% computer scientists with an H index of 40 or higher. I would like to introduce you to Professor Dr. Adrian David Cheok.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, for the very kind introduction. I wrote that myself, so no, just joking. So first of all, would like to thank Reverend Daniel Narayan for starting this church, this party, and this fantastic gala dinner. Let's give him a thanks. Thank you. Thank you also to Councillor Rosalie Cristani for her great speech, and the Organiser-in-Chief and National Secretary, Yvonne Gentle. She did a great job. So let me take you back a little bit in time, not so far back in time, 2008. So that's about 10 years ago. I was given an award, Young Global Fellow, I was younger then, of the World Economic Forum. And so I was invited to go and speak in Davos in Switzerland. For those of you who know, every year the Davos conference has about 2,000 or 3,000 people. They're all the world leaders. Last year Trump went, President Xi, they're all there. I actually bumped into Bill Gates in the men's toilet once. It's that kind of place. I was in awe then. I was a young professor. I'm 47 now, so I was about 36 then. You're a young professor. And I was in awe of all these great leaders in one place. And at the coffee breaks and at the dinners like this, I heard a lot of people say to me that, because I didn't know what Davos was about. I was a computer science professor. We just sit in the labs and type away and do programming of computers, right? So we don't really get out much. So I was wondering, what is this Davos about? So I asked people at the dinner, coffee breaks, etc. And they said basically, everyone who's important in the world gathers together. It's in early January. It's like the second week of January. And we plan out the whole year. And we decide the destiny of the whole world. And that was literally what they said. And that's literally what they thought. And of course, I also believed it because it looked like that, right? You got all these leaders here and the CEOs, and they're all hobnobbing. And by the way, they drink a lot of alcohol there. I saw Bill Clinton and Putin carrying 3 whole bottles of vodka. They finished it together. Anyway, September. Let's go forward. In September of the same year, we had one of the biggest economic crashes in all of the world's history. Right? In one day, I think there was more money lost than has ever been lost in the history of mankind. And I was scratching my head. I was thinking, how come nobody, none of these elite leaders in Davos in January, not a single one predicted that would happen? So that was the beginning of my journey into thinking more about politics and what's now called populism. I didn't know about that word at that time. So I went back to Davos 2009. I was invited again to give a speech. That time I was talking about, my research work in robotics and AI, things like that. And I asked these people, what happened? What happened? Explain to me. I'm just an engineer. I'm a scientist. And they said, it's the fault of all those poor people, all right? I was speaking to an Australian man. He works at Goldman Sachs in New York. I won't say his name, but he said it's all the fault of, actually he used the word bastards, right, because he's an Aussie, right? But they literally blamed it on the poor people who took out the loans. He said the fault was people took out loans they couldn't afford. But as we now know, if you've read into the details of what happened, the banks were pushing out loans to people like they were selling drugs, right? Like you're selling cocaine. And all these poor people, of course, they took it. You're getting a interest-free loan, basically. And then they repackage what they call junk loans, right? That's the technical word, into AAA bonds, all right? So that is how the disaster happened. They all knew what they were doing, and they were just going to keep on making more and more money, until it all crashed, as it did in 2008. But they didn't really care about the working class man and working class woman. All right, they were making trillions of dollars by doing this, selling junk loans as AAA bonds. It's essentially what they do. What happened next is they walked into the president's office. That time I think it was Bush, and they said, if you don't give us $1 trillion by 5 p.m., the US economy is going to crash, totally crash. And 72 hours later, the world economy will crash. So they basically walked out the door, the bankers, with $1 trillion, a lot of money, all right? And not a single banker ever got punished. Not a single banker went to jail for that. And they were doing it, believe me, with their eyes open. Who really suffered was the average working class people. Because what they did is, to save the bankers, they injected massive amounts of liquidity. All right? So first was that $1 trillion, but it got more and more. So essentially what happens when you inject massive amounts of, you're basically printing money, is that interest rates go to zero. So if you're the average working class man or woman and you do what has been done in the Judeo-Christian culture for 2,000 years, you put money in the bank, you buy a house, you save, it doesn't work anymore because You put money in a bank, you get interest rate of 0, basically. Actually, it's negative because you withdraw money from the ATM machine and they charge you $4 or something. I don't know why the computer should be free, right? But the point is that they created massive problems for the working class man and woman. And they basically didn't care. I saw them in Davos. They totally, really didn't care. So these elites, the geniuses of this world, got away with basically daylight robbery on a massive scale and destroyed the lives of many working class men and women. And that, if you listened also to a very fine man, I think he's a guru of the right, is Steve Bannon. If you listen to his talks, he also talks about this. But, you know, these geniuses, or the elites, doing this massive catastrophe, that was the root of Brexit, right? So Brexit really happened because of 2008. People realize that these elites don't know what they're doing. They don't care anything about the average person, and so they basically, you know, had a revolution against the elites because everyone thought there is no way people would vote for Brexit. All the elites thought that, and they were shocked when it happened. But the people's feeling was that we can't trust these elites anymore. And I guarantee any one of you would do a better job in government or running a bank, for example, than these elites. Any one of you. They think they're geniuses, but they did a massive, massive catastrophe. So that really was the real reason why Brexit happened, and that's why 2016 we saw Trump come into power. Again, the elites thought that would never happen, right? New York Times, I read New York Times on the morning of the US election. It said Trump has an 8% chance of winning, all right? You probably heard that they said there's no path to victory. There's no path to victory for Trump. But he got in, and again, it's for the same reason. There's been a populist movement, a populist revolt around the world, and we're seeing populist governments now in Italy, in Hungary, in Poland, right? Steve Bannon is in Europe now to help all these populist governments get into power. It's a worldwide phenomenon, and I believe Rise Up Australia Party is the party in Australia to stand up for the working class man and woman. It is the populist party in Australia. So the second thing that the people who are the elites, the party of Davos, you can call them, the permanent political class, the second thing that they did was to let China rise. And it's not like the second law. I'm a scientist, so it's not like the second law of thermodynamics, right? It's not a given that China would become the #2 economy. It's not a given. It's not the second law of thermodynamics. It was all done because, again, these geniuses thought it was a fantastic idea to let China into the World Trade Organization and to let all the manufacturing jobs go to China. Now, I've got nothing against Chinese people. I am actually half Chinese myself. All right? My father is Malaysian Chinese. So I'm not talking about the people here. I'm talking about the government, the communist, mercantilist, authoritarian government in the People's Republic of China. So the elites thought it was a fantastic idea because they made, again, massive profits by building things that at 10 times less cost, and then selling it back to you, right, making a big, huge profit. What they didn't realize, well, they probably realized it, but they didn't care, is that all of the manufacturing jobs are shipped off to China. And I was born in Adelaide. I grew up in Adelaide. And when I was a kid, when I was at university even, we had 3 car plants. We had General Motors Holden, we had Ford, and we had Mitsubishi. And now we have exactly 0. Right. Actually, when I graduated from my engineering, I was offered a job at Mitsubishi Motors. Lucky I didn't take it because I would have been retrenched pretty fast. But I'm not sure if you know there's a suburb called Elizabeth in Adelaide, probably named after Queen Elizabeth. 35% unemployment. Can you imagine that? In one of the richest countries in the world, Australia, we are one of the richest GDP per head. 35% unemployment in one of the suburbs, just north of Adelaide. It's a northern suburb. And in South Australia, youth unemployment is about 25%. The biggest employer is, exactly, sir, it is the government. So that just shows you that the economy is in total collapse. Because when the government is the biggest employer, something is very, very, very wrong. South Australia is basically what in US they call a Rust Belt state. All right? It's a Rust Belt state. No hope, no future. And going back to the massive liquidity which was given to the banks by the elites, they basically paid off themselves. By the way, if you have a home loan and you default on it, for sure the bank will come and take away your home. But if you're a banker and you're $1 trillion in debt, you just ask the government, they'll give it to you, right? So it's kind of very, very weird socialism for the upper 0.1% of our societies. But the young people, all right, where are the young people? There's a few young people. There we go, yeah. All right. Oh, your kids, Rosalie. They're one of the first generation where they've done surveys and they think they'll be worse off than their parents. Right? Now the young Australians, there's some surveys done, and in America, they believe they will be worse off than their parents. One of the first times ever, when youth have pessimism and no ambition, right? Basically, our kids are like the modern day Russian serfs, right? There's nowhere to save. You put money in the bank, you're just going to lose it. There's no point to save anymore. You've got no chance of buying a house because the massive printing of money made house prices rise all around the world, including Australia. So these young people, most of them, are going to work in dead-end jobs, not be able to save, and not be able to buy a house. This is the foundation of the Judeo-Christian culture for thousands of years. It was to, save up money, buy a house, start a family. And if you wonder why people don't start families anymore, the young kids, it's why. Because they think they can't afford it. So it's causing destruction at the basic level of our Western culture, our Judeo-Christian culture. So I would like to continue now about as I mentioned, the elites, the permanent political class, as I mentioned, thought it was a really great idea to let China rise. And they say now, but when I say permanent political class, it really is true, because if you look at some of the politicians, their father was a MP, their grandfather was an MP, right? It's basically a permanent political class. They don't really care about you. They're just interested to stay in power. That's why people are now turning to populism and hopefully voting for Rise Up Australia. We need to change the permanent political class. So what's happened, as I mentioned, they let China rise, but they let China into the World Trade Organization. And they had this great idea, any of you remember in the 80s and 90s, they had this great, fantastic idea that by China entering World Trade Organization, they will trade and there'll be democracy and they'll turn into a kind of liberal, Western democracy, right? Again, those genius elites and the permanent political class were so unbelievably wrong, okay? Any of you would have done a better job running the country than them. And then they also said, we don't need to make things anymore. We're going to turn into a service economy. But a lot of those service economy jobs are really dead-end, casual, jobs with no future. So it really destroys society when you don't have decent manufacturing jobs where people can have dignity in their work. All right? People need dignity in their work, not casual service economy. We all can't just be working in McDonald's. It's just like, then the country's really down the hole. So I just want to say that, again, it's not about Chinese people. I'm half Chinese myself. It's about the communist, authoritarian state that we have in China. They actually publicly say what they're going to do. They published a document called Made in China 2025. It used to be on one of their web pages. I've read it. But they took it down because Trump kept mentioning it in his tweets, in his speeches, right? So they took it down. But you know what? It's like, the best way to do things is do it totally in public, because then people don't notice it, right? But they totally publicly said, by 2025, which is only 5-6 years away, China will be leading the world in the next generation, the fourth industrial revolution, which is AI, robotics, 5G. So they have not only won this industrial revolution, but they want to win the next one, right? So if you think things are bad now, it's going to be even worse. Australia, unless we have different people in the government, we are going to lose the next industrial revolution. We're not going to be making the robotics. We're not going to be doing the AI, and we're not going to be making 5G. It's all going to come from China. The 5G is very dangerous because it's not just about, downloading videos faster. It is a revolution. It's the Internet of Things. 5G is about everything being connected to the Internet. And as you know, there's probably a company called Huawei. I mean, probably know about a company called Huawei who is pushing the 5G. If it is allowed, you're basically giving control to the People's Liberation Army. Because Huawei actually was a unit of People's Liberation Army originally. And believe me, in the back, they're still controlled by the PLA. So if we let 5G happen in Australia or in other Western countries, we're basically giving away the next industrial revolution to them. And also, there's 3 kinds of war. Steve Bannon says this. There's economic war, we've lost it already with China. There's information war, we're going to lose that too, probably, if we don't get good leaders in government. And there's the normal war we all know, kinetic war with guns. But, war is not just about guns. There's economic war, information war. We've already lost the economic war with China, and if we don't shape up, we're going to lose the information war too, and it's going to be a tragedy for society. One more thing, recently the Chinese Communist government made a secret deal with the Vatican. Why is it secret? Because nobody knows what's in that deal. But we can guess, because they fired a few priests, a few cardinals who, don't agree with the Communist Party philosophy. So basically, now the Catholic Church, they've allowed the Chinese Communist government to must approve all of the priests. All right. So why did the Vatican do that? That's another terrible thing. But there is underground churches, there is underground Catholic Church, and they're being horribly oppressed. So that's why there's a lot of good Chinese people, because there's a lot of underground churches in China. And recently, one of the provinces in China said they would give 15,000 US dollars, it's a lot of money in the outside provinces, if you report an underground church, right? So they're really going after any church which is not approved. So, for example, if Pastor Daniel went to China, if you wanted to preach, you would need approval of the, communist government. So they're controlling our Judeo-Christian faith as well. So this election coming up, May 18th, I hope you can all take all these points in mind. The major politicians don't talk about it, but Trump talked about it when he was, running in 2016. He talked about China, and as far as I know, Labor and Liberal don't really tell you this, but hopefully, Rise Up, Australia Party, and other parties will tell you about this, and you really should think about the future of Western society when you vote in the next election. One more thing before I finish. The second document they've released was this One Belt, One Road, okay? And that one's still on the internet, I think. So they've made a document, Made in China 2025, and they made another document called One Belt, One Road. And they're basically trying to recreate the Silk Road again, going backwards, because last time it was from the west to the east, and now it's from the east to the west. And you probably see they are, what they do is they give massive loans to countries around the world, so Southeast Asia, the South Asian continent, Sri Lanka, where Pastor Daniel comes from, the Middle East, and recently even in Italy, in Venice, they made a deal with the government to buy a port. So there's only one reason you do that. And the British knew this 200 years ago at the height of the British Empire. Very smart people, the British, but maybe not now, but they were then. If you control all the choke points of the world, all right, Mediterranean, Suez Canal, the Straits of Malacca near Singapore, if you control those points, you control the world. And that's exactly what China is doing. Now, you've probably seen the fantastical yellow commercials from Clive Palmer, right? And he talks about one little airport. I've actually spoken to Clive Palmer in person a couple of times, and he totally doesn't get it. He's just thinking about his one airport strip in Western Australia, but it's not about that, right? It is about China publicly saying one belt, one road, and taking control of all the major ports in the world. This is what the British Empire did, and there's only one reason to do that, is world domination. That's what they're aiming for. This is another very important issue to think about when you vote at the next election. So let me just finish off with two definitions. I'm a professor, so all right. So to summarize, I think two very important issues today, probably the most important issues, are economic nationalism and populism. Economic nationalism is about citizenship value. It's about the value of citizens. It's rather than in the 1980s they had the radical idea of maximizing shareholder value, right? That was the 1980s. It was a terrible mistake by the geniuses because it turned companies into shells workers into expendables, just numbers, and communities into ghost towns. In Adelaide, South Australia is turning into a ghost town. Populism. Second big movement is populism. We must take away power from the geniuses, the permanent political class in Canberra. They're not there for the people. They have been crucial to letting China take manufacturing jobs from Australia and leaving our country as a tributary state. So a tributary state is basically like what India was to England, all right? So they, you know, all the salt, cotton, everything was sent to England, and they make high-value goods and send it back to India. That's exactly what's happening here. We are a tributary state to China. We sell them our coal, minerals at a very cheap rate. By the way, Councillor Rosalie said a great thing about energy, because we send our coal very cheaply to China, and they have cheap energy to power their factories. So why in the world are we paying high prices when we're digging the coal here? So it's total nonsense. So we should think about building up Australia, not building up China or any other country. So please support Rise Up Australia Party at the next election. I think we are one of the few parties thinking about these things. Pastor Daniel, you know, he had a very big court case, and a good friend of mine said, if you don't take the flak, you're not on target, all right? So you've got to take the flak. He's on target. For the young people, let me explain. World War II, all right, when the planes went over, bombing, if you're in the wrong place, you're not going to get any flak. It means you're not on target. So thank you to everyone. Thank you, Pastor Daniel, for starting this amazing party. And please, on May 18th, vote 1 for Rise Up Australia Party. Thank you very much.
That was awesome, Adrian. Really, really good word. And I think that, you know, it hits us all here that really we've been too asleep in this nation. We need to wake up and rise up. And we need to stand for what we believe, you know, and not be afraid to say it. Not be afraid to stand up and speak out what we believe. And I don't think that we